Welcome to Sustainable Stock, Reviving Legacy Genetics, the podcast that delves into the power of traditional cattle genetics and the ranchers bringing them back. We're returning to the tried and true practices that prioritize what truly works on the ranch. Each episode, we'll talk to ranchers who are rediscovering the methods that built strong, resilient, efficient, and fertile herds in the 1960s and 70s. These breeders are blending the best of the past with practical solutions for today's ranching world. Whether you're passionate about the future of ranching or curious about heritage genetics, this podcast is for you. Presented by Bos Sires. Tune in as we reconnect with the roots of the herd. Here's your host, Patrick Powers.
Welcome to Sustainable Stock, Reviving Legacy Genetics. I'm your host, Patrick Powers, and today I'm joined by Grant Vassberg, co-founder of Bos Sires. Bos Sires is more than a genetics company. It's transforming the cattle industry with sustainable adaptive genetics. In this episode, we'll explore how Grant and the Bos Sires team are driving changes and preserving legacy knowledge. Thanks for joining me today, Grant.
Yeah, thanks for having me, bud.
How's the weather out there? We just got through with a cold snap here, man.
Oh, it's getting better. Not really Brahmin weather, but it is what it is.
Well, just so we can get everybody introduced, would you like to give a quick rundown on who you are and your operation?
Yeah, well, I'm a registered Brahmin breeder, technically. I'm here in Central Texas. Oh, I guess my father got into this business 25, 30-ish years ago, and I kind of took the reins in 2010. But anyway, I guess in 2017 is when my wife and that's 2017 is when I went independent and continued Kallion Farms on my own. And then my wife and I bought our headquarters in 2020 here in Normandy, Texas. So here we are today.
It's a good spot. My parents live right down the road.
I might have run into your dad a time or two.
Well, could you tell us a little bit more about Kallion Farms so we can get to know more about you and your family's operation?
Sure. I guess Kallion, like I said, my dad got into the business 25 years ago, and I know his niche, or he was known as the performance guy, and was using all the latest technologies and, DNA work, IVF, ET, feed conversion, bunks, carcass data, ultrasound data, all this stuff. And he was had some PhD consultants and breeding consultants and whatnot. And so he was an out of the box thinker or breeder at the time. And, but I know in 2010, when I took over, that's where my operation I radically changed everything and was like, hey, no, let's get back to the basics. Cause hey, a cow that gives you a calf every year, that's the profitable cow. And and I didn't know at the time, but I kind of adapted a Lassiter approach where breeding and culling and creating cattle that are adapted to your environment. And so anyway, that's where I kind of radically changed everything, but I grew up in that world. And so I guess that kind of gives me a different perspective on where, with genetics and technologies.
Absolutely. That's what drew my wife and I to you. This is our second episode, so I hope you don't mind. I'm going to break in and give a little background on who I am. I'm Patrick Powers, and my wife and I are going to be part of the marketing team for Bos Sires, and we are going to be over this podcast. And we got involved with Bos Sires and Grant through chance, purely chance. We have a small operation with miniature cattle, and right now we have 10 cows. And I'm a cattleman by no means, but after speaking with Grant a couple times and benefiting from being welcome to one of his field days, or what would you call those, Grant?
Yeah, it was a field day.
We walked away with a lot of new knowledge and a new way of looking at our herd, and realized that a lot of the sustainable principles that he was preaching, I would feel like laid the groundwork for Bos Sires with you and others. It applied to our herd, and it was just because how hands-on we were with our small group. And we were able to look for just things, mothering nature of mothering ability of our cows, and if I had to help calf at all, that cow was gone that following season, and your stout principles of culling, I applied on a much smaller scale, but it kind of made me open my eyes a little bit to the world of full size cattle and y'all's line of thinking.
Sure. No, what's not a crazy idea, but and not in the miniature cattle all, but I just know like the cattle y'all have are technically unimproved compared to a lot of your mainstream breeds today. But what's crazy, not thought, but a fact is that y'all's cattle are actually more profitable and sustainable and would have a better chance of feeding the world than most mainstream genetics.
My unregistered mutts I'm making in the front yard, huh?
Yeah, yep. But I think that's where when you and your wife heard our presentations, a lot of that stuff kind of made sense. Like, hey, cows that can eat grass and give you a calf, that's kind of number one. But yet, the cattle industry as a whole has forgotten that.
Well, it's a simple job they have, but it's also magic. They take a unusable resource known as grass and turn it into a steak.
Yeah.
Okay, that's why they're valuable in my front yard.
Nah, for sure, bud.
But to get back to Kallion and your operation, my wife and I have had the pleasure of being out there a couple times, and we're really impressed with them. And do you have any points of pride in your operation? Is it your bull operation? Is it your females? Is it?
Yeah, I guess backing up, I don't know, for lack of a better word, not trying to sound corny, but as a breeder, I was kind of having a holistic approach where you're breeding for fertility, breeding for docility, good feet, good bags, all these different traits. But fast forward to, I guess, a year or two ago, I'd kind of figured out that all this is correlated, and that I don't know if you want to call it sustainable genetics, or that's what some people call it. But all this is correlated, and that by breeding for docility, that I guess to answer your question, the docility of my Brahmins is probably our biggest niche. And I've explained to people before it's really sad. We can preach about fertility, preach about inputs, preach about all this stuff, but honestly, what's kept us in business is docility, and that the Brahmin breed is notorious for being crazy. And
you changed my mind on them.
Oh yeah,
I'm very comfortable letting my little boy walk out and love on your cows.
Oh yeah, like literally this morning, my pregnant wife was getting out of the truck, opening gates in our bull pasture, and that's not
not common practice.
99% of Brahmin ranches, I would not let her do that.
That's good, man.
But I know we can touch on it later, and dive into more of what Bos Sires is. But I know a big principle that I'm constantly fighting or trying to wake people up on is that the cattle industry as a whole, we need to quit, I guess, classifying cattle by breeds, and that within the breed is a monster variation. And that I know today I'm getting screwed bad by all these characteristics that Brahmins are known for. And like, as soon as I tell someone I'm a Brahmin breeder, and if they don't know about my program yet, they automatically assume like, oh, your cattle are crazy, and oh, they're not fertile. And so anyway, I know we can touch on it more later, but that's...
So you've got to dispel some common misconceptions associated, and you feel like some of those would fall away if we would just view cattle as cattle instead of having subcategories.
Yeah, to a degree, yes. And that I know, and what's really sad is it's really sad, but the Brahmin breed is quote unquote a maternal breed, and they're supposed to be super hardy. If you look at the Brahmin Association website, and yeah, that's not the case for most Brahmins.
Well, as I said earlier, I'm new to all this, and I'm learning a lot of new terms. So maybe you could help me by understanding your operation. I have a little more knowledge on yours. Where do you fall in the cattle market? Are you a seed stock operation, and are you commercial cattlemen? And would you mind defining those for me so I'll have a greater understanding of where you fall in them?
So the seed stock, I am a seed stock breeder, which means I'm producing cattle for reproduction to be used for rebreeding purposes.
So fertility would be a big factor there.
Yeah, you would assume. So yes, but that's where I would be at. And And I guess pyramid of it is seed stock breeders are supposed to be breeding for commercial cattlemen. But what's so sad is there's a monster disconnect, and that seed stock breeders have forgotten their sole purpose, which is for breeding cattle for other ranchers, and that the commercial cattlemen are historically would rely on seed stock breeders to breed bulls to help improve their operations, and which I guess that's a lot of the big picture of Bos Sires is we're trying to get back to reality and back to the principles of the cattle business.
Okay.
Just not what we're doing, or kind of, hey, what are we doing here, guys? And it's kind of a reality check.
All right. Well, I think the easiest way to ask this is, what is Bos Sires, Grant?
Yeah. When you get down to the basics of it, it's, I guess, two companies in one. One of it being that it is a genetic company that is selling semen and embryos and potentially live animals if people are wanting them. So it's kind of like a generic semen company in that aspect. But secondly, though, I guess where it's a dual purpose company is that it's also a service company for the breeders that are breeding these kind of cattle. And when I say this kind of cattle, some people call it sustainable genetics, or I kind of not argue against it, but I try to explain to people, I'm like, no, this is hardcore cattleman genetics, and that your traditional cattlemen have been producing sustainable genetics for decades. Like, they've been there, but people just haven't really listened to these guys. When it comes down to it, it's kind of two companies in one. What I mean by service company is that the breeders that do have these kind of genetics, well, here's a company that's going to be representing them and kind of offers a distribution network for them, where now they have a company representing them that's selling semen for them in other countries like Honduras or Pakistan and etc.
So there'll be a mold that a breeder needs to fit to be able to be a part of Bos Sires?
Oh, 100%. Which there is an application process to it, which I know we can touch on that again later, but no, there's definitely a very particular type of animal that we're representing. And I guess backing up a little bit, Patrick, on when you asked if I was a seed stock breeder, which is correct, but within the seed stock breeders or producers, traditionally, I guess a lot of people think there's two categories: that there's your show breeders and then performance breeders. And that's the way a lot of people view the cattle industry. But the hidden category that has almost zero representation is your maternal breeders, and by maternal, that means breeders that are producing feminine cows or cows that are naturally fertile, et cetera, et cetera.
That was new principles you brought me around to, the concept of not fertility, but
Maternal.
no, they're the proper representation of their hormonal balance. I spoke with John Atkinson's in my last episode about that, and he went on that, and I gained a good amount of education from that. But I believe my first exposure to that was through you and your very simple way of defining it, that you can look for these mothering capabilities, and you look at their build and a lot of other principles to identify what is hormonally balanced as male versus female.
Sure. Now, what's sad is in your breeders that are breeding maternal genetics, which is also sad. Like, maternal sounds like you're breeding for femininity, which, yes, we're breeding for femininity in the females, but on the flip side, we're actually breeding for masculinity in the males.
Well, that's something John touched on last episode. He said that the bullest of bulls will create you a balanced female.
Yeah, exactly. And I know the term hormonally balanced is kind of a term used in that field or that line of thinking, but what people need to realize is hormonally balanced means that the two genders are very different. And what's very sad, or people that aren't in the cattle industry, if they're aware that a lot of the cows today out in their pastures, that, hey, that chick's not a chick. That's kind of something in between there. But that should not be controversial, that females are different than males. And it's the same in humans. I mean, it's the same in a lot of species of animals out there. And for some reason the breeders out there that are...
It's pretty bad that in 2025 that's an explosive comment you just made.
Yeah, no shit. But I was this is before I was introduced to bondsman, but I was on my own, I thought, or I was kind of a lone voice, which that's kind of the whole thing with Bos Sires we can touch on again, but I was kind of the lone voice. I was screaming that a lot of these cows, like, those chicks aren't chicks, or those cows aren't feminine, and they're like, well, no, Grant, that's your femininity is an adjective. And I'm like, no, there's freaking biology to this. This is like a feminine cow has a certain look. Little I know I was kind of touching or beating around onto the principles and didn't know that was an established science, or I mean, I would call it definite science, but it's kind of not a voodoo, but a lot of mainstream just kind of brushes bondsman off or tries to act like that's an old wives' tale kind of type thing, but it's not.
You gave me a little rundown on the fact that Bos Sires is two companies in one. It's a
Sure.
co-op style group, right, of a collection of breeders that are covering principles of sustainability and fertility. But the part I didn't hear mentioned is this domestic or is this also international?
No, it's very, very much so international. And I guess I say Bos Sires, but the struggle that your breeders of sustainable genetics or maternal or cattleman genetics, that the struggle we're in the United States, it's literally worldwide. And that it's going on in every single country from here to Australia, that the breeders aren't being represented that have been doing the right thing. So this is definitely an international model, and which I know is sometimes it sounds like we're trying to accomplish quite a bit, but kind of going back to what Bos Sires is it's a movement, and I guess not more importantly, but part of it is that we're trying to change the incentive structure, and that the breeders that are doing the right thing are now going to be the ones getting rewarded, and that's kind of where this international concept came from is because as a seed stock breeder, a big part of the income source is international sales, and that selling semen and embryos and live animals internationally can be a substantial part of a breeder's income.
And you feel your genetics have not been represented in others of this sustainable model and fertile model?
Not at all, not at all. And that's where I guess this past 2.5 years I don't know if it's been about eight. I think I've been on about 8 different trips. But yeah, no, I guess in some of these countries, like historically, I had a couple bulls that were contracted with a genetic company that was selling semen on my bulls. But yeah, but it was kind of sad. Like I was in Colombia and was at like their national show, and I went to the booth that from the semen company where my bulls were being represented, and my bulls weren't there. And then I was trying to look in a catalog, and I had to like download a catalog on a QR code to finally find my bulls, and they were just line items in an index, and which that company was a little frustrated with it beforehand, and I was telling them, I was like, hey, my bulls, like in these catalogs, you got to put that my bulls are bred for fertility and easy keeping, and just you got to give me something here, you got to give me a bone. And but that's really literally where that company told me, they're like, well, Grant, why would you work on fertility if it's not heritable? And I was like, well, I guess that's why my bulls don't belong in this company.
Yeah,
that's kind of where the need for Bos Sires was not created from that, but that's where it's kind of coming into play.
Since Bos Sires is challenging the status quo and current line of thinking of fertility and its heritability, could you define fertility for me quickly and the listener? I mean, what is the Bos Sires model of fertility?
Yeah, no, you touched on a really good point there. But no, the way we would define fertility is, hey, how often does that cow naturally give you a calf? And hey, is that bull out there naturally breeding cows and servicing them or getting them pregnant, whatever you want to call it? But then on a way that a cattleman or a breeder like in Bos Sires, a way we would look or define how fertile a female is how often she's giving you a calf. And kind of what Bos Sires is sticking to the principles of raising cows, but your real commercial cattlemen that produce or raise cattle for a living, like one of their number one rules is a cow has to give you a calf every year. And if she's not capable of doing that, she's not a profitable cow. And what's just real sad is the seed stock industry has forgotten that basic rule. But I guess to get into a little bit of the science, when you ask me about what the definition of fertility, that is a fundamental question, because the mainstream mind of thinking at saying fertility is lowly heritable, when you look at the science of it, it's because they're not defining it correctly. And when they're using certain indicators of fertility, and apparently those certain indicators are lowly heritable, well, they then assume fertility overall is lowly heritable, which is nonsense.
Well, Grant, you've piqued my interest on your concept of a better incentive structure. You think you could expand on that a little further?
Yep. Now, as far as changing the incentive structure, what's really sad is that if someone's new to the cattle business and you ask them, "Hey, would you want a cow that eats grass and gives you a calf every year?" They'd be like, "Oh, well, yeah." Like
Isn't that what they're currently already doing?
That's no, that is opposite. That's so wrong. But yeah, no, that's where a lot of people that are new to the cattle business. They assume that cattle are fertile and that breeders are breeding for profitability. And by profitability, it's profitable for as like a commercial aspect of, hey, she's low input or fertile, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone assumes that breeders are breeding for that, and that's
No, I agree. That was one thing I really enjoyed speaking on with John. He restructured my idea of a profitable cow in my mind whenever he defined every input going in. And that a cow is profitable on its own the moment you weigh it against everything that's been put in. I feel like maybe our industry has gone to that. I mean, have you noticed that? I bought a cow in the past and it just didn't perform the way I thought it would. And all the questions fell back to me, not of the cow. Well, are you feeding it the same grain I fed? Well, are you doing this? Are you caring for its feet in this way? Are you doing all this? And I feel like the question should have been, well, did I get the right cow for my property and my available inputs?
yeah, no, 100%. But those questions aren't asked just because most people that are new to the business, like I said, assume that these things are accounted for or bred for. But just on the American cattle industry as a whole, we're just so disconnected to reality that it's sad that breeders or they think it's normal to have to nurse a calf or pull a calf or like hoof trimming. I guess to put it into a funny perspective, like the gentleman from Botswana that's helping us out with Bos Sires, but first time I talked to him about a year ago, he said he saw on Facebook like an American breeder hoof trimming a cow, and he said he literally almost like shit himself. He was like, I couldn't believe that American breeders are like giving pedicures to cows. He's like, what the hell is going on over there?
Unknown concept to him, huh?
Yeah, he's like, I couldn't believe it. He's like, I never in 100 years would have thought that a breeder would trim the hooves of a cow. He's like, what is going on? But yeah, that's how sad like how disconnected from reality we are to what's acceptable in today's standards, I guess.
That harkens to a really good point. I mean, we've touched a lot on fertility and profitability. We've touched a little bit, but I also wanted to speak to you about Bos Sires' handling on adaptability. I've seen a lot of your stuff about the adaptability of cattle to new environments. Could you speak on that for a moment?
Yeah, I guess when we're talking about adaptability, it's I guess a founding principle of Bos Sires is that you match the genetics to the right environment, and that every environment is going to have a specific type of cow that is most suited for that environment. Which I guess like a silly analogy would be if you just look at Mother Nature out in the wild, like on how many different species there are within an animal. That's kind of a similar concept. But to use an extreme to make a point would be you wouldn't try to grow palm trees in Alaska, and that's just kind of like, well, yeah, it's not going to work, or it doesn't sound sustainable. That doesn't sound like a profitable situation. which I know that's an extreme or sounds like a silly extreme, but sometimes that's what it takes to get the point across or for people to grasp something. Going back to Kallion, like that's where in my trips internationally, that's where I never try to I never once try to push or misrepresent Kallion, and like I never was trying to say, oh, like Kallion is the solution for everything, or that my Brahma genetics can fix everything. It was I guess that's like a principle of real cattlemen or the type of breeders in Bos Sires is we're all very fully aware of that we're all breeding for our environment or our ranch, and that say some of the Florida guys that are in this thing, like Kemfer Cattle Company, that his genetics or his Brahma genetics will work better than mine in certain situations, and that's just it's just like a mutual respect thing. And that's what's also been kind of cool about this Bos Sires deal is that your real cattlemen know that principle, and so there is a lot of mutual respect amongst the breeders, and it's not a nasty competitive environment.
So there's not going to be one guy that'll fit your Brahmin portion and another for your Angus. Though you'll have a little bit of representation all across the board.
Oh yeah.
And even under each breed, there'll be different environments represented.
100%. And I guess, I mean, this analogy might not work for the entire world, but was it, I guess, like here in the United States, I was thinking about this the other day of where we're going to try to match genetics from some other country and find or see what or find an environment they would fit in somewhere else. Like a silly analogy would be like, what is it? Those pythons in Florida, like that become invasive.
Oh yes.
Okay, like so those pythons weren't indigenous to Florida originally, but
they're sure making it.
Hell yeah! But that's kind of the concept of Bos Sires is where we're going to introduce, hopefully, new genetics that can help improve the cattle production in a certain environment. Like, hey, that freaking snake in Florida, or that snake was perfectly adapted to that environment in Florida, and
didn't even know it. Had never even knew that portion of the world existed.
Exactly. So that's kind of what we're going to be like, okay, so here I am in Central Texas, and I'm breeding Brahmins in Central Texas. Well, hey, there's going to be a certain area in Honduras that's very similar. I say Honduras is closer to the equator, but maybe like Pakistan, for example, that the Central Texas will have a similar type environment as certain parts of Pakistan, and bam, that's where my Brahmins come into play.
That's wild. I don't have a global thought pattern like you on that. It's hard to put myself in that line of thinking. But I do ask, what are the stakes? What demand is it that you feel Bos Sires is meeting of the market? Is it a domestic or an international? And this is it's a cause as much as it is a company.
Yeah, the future of beef, period. Like, I don't know. I mean, I guess most Americans are country guys or whatever, or just normal guys like eating beef. It's kind of like, hey, well, a good way to keep beef around might be fertility. That's a
fair point.
I don't unless everyone wants to start eating the lab grown like Bill Gates stuff. I don't there might be, I'm not in for that, but no, but back on a more serious note though is the sustainable type genetics, or like there's different ways to call it, but the whole regenerative ag movement and this whole making America healthy again, or healthy beef and healthy products or grass-fed beef, for example. It's not that we're trying to, it almost sounds too good to be true, but these same kind of genetics are what is required for that. And that if someone wants a healthy grass-fed steak, well, it kind of makes sense that it would need to come from genetics that are adapted to that environment, low input, where you would need a cow that eats grass and is healthy.
Well, you spoke about you felt a need to transition your herd when you took it over from your father, and you've pushed for fertility and all these other traits of sustainability. Do you feel like there's a heavy need for that outside of the U.S., or do you feel the beef market has been led astray outside of the U.S. with current genetics in trade?
Oh yeah, I guess I should have brought that up earlier. But yeah, on these, what's so sad is that internationally, I've been to some of these countries like Honduras and Panama and whatnot, and literally some of these countries are averaging 40% calf crops, which kind of means like their cows are having a calf on average every 2 to 3 years.
Oh no.
What's so sad is that they're being told there's all nutrition problems. But when I went on these trips and looked at it and saw the genetics these are all out of, I'm like, well, no, this isn't nutrition. This is genetics. And for example, in Honduras, my good friends down there, they've been hiring. They've hired PhD consultants and nutritionists trying to figure out why their cows aren't capable of having a calf every year. But when I went down there, and I'm not trying to sound arrogant at all, but I remember there was these cows in the pen, the working facilities, and I pointed at a cow and I was like, well, who's that cow over there? And they're like, oh, well, that's Princessa. And I was like, all right, well, what's her production? They're like, oh, well, she gives us a calf every year. I'm like, well, that's your answer. That cow is your answer. Make more of her. And then sure enough, when we looked at her genetics, the majority of her pedigree was native Honduras genetics. It had none of the main...
More locally adapted.
Yeah, it had none of the mainstream stuff from the States. And these guys, which I know we'll talk on again later, but when I showed them the data of what's going on in the States, that a lot of these mainstream genetics or these bulls are coming out of cows that only have a calf once every 1,300 days or have never had a calf naturally. When you show that data to these guys down there, they get pretty pissed off. They're like, wait a second, this is what I've been buying? And I'm like, hey.
We just had a cow here on our little operation that had its second calf in 1 calendar year.
Yeah, that's how you feed a country.
That is wild. I can't imagine. There would be... I cannot envision a path to profitability within an operation with cattle that are only calving on 1,300, potentially 1,300 day intervals.
Yeah, I think your interview with John, he touched on it a little bit, but what's so sad on what's going on in the cattle industry today in the States is someone gets their hands on these type of buys these females and spends all this money on a female, and then if not raising a calf, they have trouble getting her pregnant, and this happens a lot. So then they go to IVF and mass produce the cow to be able to try to recoup their money, and that is just kind of mind blowing, but sad. This is kind of the sad reality of where we're at today.
Okay, so I'm new to all this.
Yep.
Will you explain IVF and you spoke that and you pair that with the concept of embryo theory? And this is my first chance to have a sit down with you and pick your mind. Could you dive in a little deeper on those for me and how this falls into Bos Sires' realm?
Sure. Well, I guess the Bos Sires guys, or Bos Sires the company, is we're not anti-embryo technology or that it's a tool. And I guess the ultimate responsibility is on the breeder that's utilizing the tool. But the concept of it is you have one of your best females or cows, and instead of her raising one calf a year, or possibly 2 like y'all's cow, but instead of her just raising you 1 calf a year, you could, quote unquote, in theory, go mass produce her and make more of her by taking embryos out of her, or making embryos out of that female and putting them in surrogate cows, and then that surrogate cow goes and raises a calf that's genetically from the donor.
So in one breeding window, rather than just get 1 additional calf a year out of her, I could make copy paste 10 times.
Yes. Yeah. So it's like I said, it's a tool that breeders can utilize, or a lot of seed stock breeders utilize. But I guess you asked a little bit about the embryo theory, but I guess a lot of this came from me being a co-founder of Bos Sires and identifying the breeders that are left that have fertile or naturally fertile cows. But what had happened is, I know on social media, I was seeing that a lot of these mainstream breeders would brag about large egg production, and that I guess for the past 30 some odd years, the embryo transfer technology has been a tool in the cattle industry. Everyone's just kind of assumed the more eggs a cow makes, the more fertile she is. But then fast forward to, I guess, this past 10 years at Kallion, because I've been a big user of embryo work or embryo transfer, and but I was being disciplined and really honing in on my more naturally fertile cows, and my production was dropping rapidly. And for the past few years or several years, I I'll be honest.
So by all common metrics of fertility that they're seeing with this embryo theory, you were defying it. Your more fertile cows in the real world were producing less eggs.
Yes, my production was dropping, but my cows though, even though they would make less embryos overall, my pregnancy rate was high. So it still can be done, and it can be done sustainably, but it does take discipline or patience to figure out. I guess this is what is sad, but your best breeders out there of these kind of genetics, a lot of them won't do embryo work until a cow is over 10 years and has proven that she's naturally fertile and done her job, and then she's worthy of mass producing. And by mass producing, I guess making some embryos are not a whole lot, but anyway, what's really sad is that's not a really good sales pitch if you're a salesman selling heifers. And if you're wanting to sell a heifer for $30,000, like a lot of stuff going on today, it's hard to tell someone, oh, spend $30,000 on this heifer, but wait 10 years to make sure she's worthy of mass production. So that's not a fun narrative or a good sales pitch, I guess. But that's just kind of where the industry's come to today. And because I guess the sales pitch today would be, oh, you can spend $30,000 or $50,000 on this cow or heifer, and you can go make 50 of her and sell a lot of them. And that's just the sales pitch. I guess going back with the embryo theory, though, so me individually, I just thought it was a strange situation that my cows weren't making many. But then as a co-founder of Bos Sires and talking to these other breeders out there, that's where we all found out that it was like, oh crap, all our cows are like this. And all of us breeders, we just kept it quiet or didn't think low egg production was something to brag about.
Have you found any correlating data along the same with bulls? What would be the opposite of that situation?
Well, bulls are, it's opposite. The more fertile bulls would have more volume of semen and higher quality semen. So it's kind of the exact opposite. I guess going back to, hell, we could do a whole other podcast over some of this stuff, but what's really sad is a lot of people don't realize that the more expensive semen is on a bull, there's a huge correlation with the quality of the semen. And that a lot of people don't realize the more expensive the semen is because it was more expensive to produce. And that these really fertile bulls are larger in production, so the cost per straw to produce it is cheaper to begin with. And that and I've spoken with some owners of semen companies, and there's some well-known bulls out there that will spend months in collection and only maybe produce 30 straws for the whole season. And so that cost per straw is very expensive to produce.
So there's a false sense of supply demand on the market, drives the cost up, and these uneducated buyers, like if I was new to buying, which I would be if I was in that market, I would want to spend my money the most wisely, buy the best,
Yep.
And I would be buying my way into an unsustainable operation.
I say 100%, probably 98% true. But yeah, no, that's 100% what's going on, and then you can't get mad at for someone assuming that. And that is kind of a huge not ethical, but it's been a debate for years with even my own company on what do you price semen at, because you want to keep it affordable and sustainable for your customers, but it's like a whole dilemma, because if someone's newer and they see your bull's priced at $30 a straw and so and so has a bull priced at $5,000 a straw, it's sad, but it makes sense that they assume that $5,000 straw bull is way better, and they don't realize that no, they're buying junk.
They don't realize they're not buying Harbor Freight tools.
Yeah, yeah. But I can talk for hours on this stuff, but what's also sad is when spending $5,000 a straw, it inevitably forces them to use it in IVF production, because you can use one straw to make more embryos compared to artificially inseminating a cow. Like, you wouldn't want to spend $5,000 on a straw just to maybe get a cow pregnant.
So what IVF is that? Would they pull an egg and guarantee a fertilization before implanting? Is that what that is?
Kind of, yes. But so it's like where they'll suck all these oocytes or out of a female having a petri dish, and then they drop the sperm right there on the petri dish, so
Okay.
that low quality sperm can still be used to fertilize eggs, when in reality it wouldn't. You'd be wasting money trying to inseminate a cow, because I guess inseminating a cow, the sperm would still have to travel up the track, and it takes higher quality stuff to pull that off compared to a petri dish. It's like being dropped right there on top of it.
And you would do that because you would need the guarantee because of what the straw cost was?
Yeah, or I guess the reason breeders do it is if you're going to spend $5,000 on a straw, you in theory would want to potentially go make 20 or 30 babies from it. So
Okay.
the cost of the straw is diluted across multiple calves.
Okay, well, that helps.
Yep.
Me understand that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Just some little economics behind it. Yep.
Well, I do have a question. So, if all this seems so common sense to me, and I know it does to you as well, we've talked about that on our own, but why hasn't this been done before? Why isn't this movement, this coalition, this co-op, why isn't it already living?
I think people have had they've had the concepts, or the people have seen the need for it drastically. But I think a lot of it is putting everything in, I guess, full picture. But I guess like another purpose of Bos Sires is we're scientifically proving that the real cattlemen out there are right. Which I know, and this is sad that this is controversial, but on the whole concept of fertility being lowly heritable or highly heritable, I know we talked about that earlier, but you should just see the looks on some of these guys' faces on some of these breeders, which we'll talk kind of later, but these legacy guys, or these breeders that are in their 80s or 70s and been breeding functional cattle their whole life. You can just imagine the look on their face when I tell them that universities are teaching that fertility is lowly heritable. They're just in utter shock that that's what mainstream is pushing today. So anyway, I guess it's sad, but we're the first genetic company calling bullshit that we're saying it's highly heritable. And when that assumption is changed, it fundamentally flips the entire cattle industry on its head, or the entire seed stock industry is flipped around. And I mean, we can have other talks about EPDs, and I know Johann Ziesman's done awesome work on that, exposing that EPDs aren't looking at profit per acre, and it's all revenue per head, I guess, which, like, the fact they don't even look at input costs is kind of silly. That any business out there, it's kind of common knowledge. You got revenue minus expenses equals profit, but yet here we are just looking at revenue only, apparently. And
maybe their taxes are different, because I'm working on mine right now and I'm just seeing nothing but input cost.
Yeah. Yeah, so no one asked that question. And that's what's sad is like people newer to the cattle industry, they would assume this is looked at, or surely breeders would breed for fertility and surely they would look at input costs. But no, it's just disregard that, apparently.
I think you're really hitting on a true point there, Grant. I mean, there's a lot that would just be assumed. I mean,
yeah.
You changed my line of thinking just speaking to you the couple times I have about all this. I mean, there was a lot of what I thought to be givens. I didn't feel like my herd was special at all.
Sure. Well, I'm not trying to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but a good analogy I would guess is like here in the States, a lot of people are anti-big pharma. And I guess in the cattle industry, I mean, you can look it up online, or I see it on Facebook a lot, where a lot of cattle guys out there, or ranchers, are complaining about the packers, and that there's only, was there like 4 companies control, and don't quote me on this, but was it like 4 companies control over 80% of the protein in the or North and South America? And but then you just kind of, I mean, I know this is like sounds like conspiracy talk, but you just kind of follow the money and look at who's financing the studies. And that's where people don't realize that everyone's been breeding or incentivized to breed for a feedlot environment where it's an all-you-can-eat buffet, and fertility is not a factor at all. Like, they could care less about the fertility of an animal when it's a steer in a feedlot or a heifer in a feedlot. And so anyway, but I guess when we talked about changing the incentive structure earlier, but I guess the way the studies and genetic companies and everything, they've all been incentivizing seed stock breeders breeding for a feedlot. And it's kind of common sense that a feedlot's not the same as the real world. And I guess
I saw a good quote on Facebook the other day. So there's been a lot of good cattlemen feed their way out of profitability.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's kind of an oxymoron. Like a good cattleman, like cattlemen are breeders for profitability, or
yeah.
Which I know. And I'm not gonna quote this guy, but I know when I was in Florida talking to some guys over there, and when this whole Bos Sires thing was being created, and I told them that I was like, yeah, Bos Sires it's like a cooperative where we're recruiting the real cattlemen that are out there. And they literally laughed at me. And they're like, Grant, we didn't think any of them still existed. I'm like, well, thanks. I was like, they're out there, but it's kind of back to the whole what Bos Sires is we're representing the guys that are out there. And I guess my specific role, which I know we're going to talk about roles here in a second, but as me as a representative of the United States, I'm technically a headhunter and trying to find these guys that are still left. And for people that want to join it, I know there's an application process, but I'm not trying to sound arrogant at all, but I guess roles of representatives is they're there to kind of sift through who has the right kind of cattle that we're trying to represent. And
I think that's a perfect transition. I wanted to move into that. Just looking over the Bos Sires website, I feel like this could be very helpful in letting people know that this is a call to action. This is come join the movement. The Bos Sires family is ever growing. I'd love for you to expand on that. I've got a couple notes here. The first one I'd like you to cover is, what are the roles of a breeder within Bos Sires?
So the breeders, I guess, an interesting deal. I mean, we could talk about what a real cattleman is or a breeder that we're trying to find, but I guess fundamentally these breeders, the true cattlemen, they're guys that are with their cattle every day and they make a living off of this. And they're very hands-on type guys, because it's very hard to become a cattleman when you look at a spreadsheet or have a ranch manager and you come visit once or twice a year. You're just not going to gain the skills of a real cattleman. Anyway, the breeders that are out there, they do exist. But I kind of not laugh, but one unique trait, I guess, about the breeders that we're looking for is they're inevitably going to be pissed off, and kind of like me. Because if they're happy with the status quo, that's kind of a red flag that their genetics are most likely going to be garbage. And if someone's, I guess the breeders with the best cattle out there, they're not going to be happy with what is being represented or the way the cattle industry has been, or the direction it's been moving.
And they're going to need some greater representation in the marketplace.
100%. And I guess secondly too, like if someone is that hands-on and that tied to their cattle, they're not going to have time for marketing or be good at marketing. So once again, that's kind of another indicator of whether someone has good cattle is if they're good at marketing, that's usually a sign that, once again, their genetics are garbage. Because if someone's good at marketing, that's kind of a sign or a signal that their cattle aren't good. Well, if someone has really good cattle or these true cattlemen out there, their repeat customers they have a long list of repeat customers. So why would they spend money on marketing or get good at marketing if they don't need to? And I'm not going to name names, but some of these breeders out there, they're not good, or they're not going to have a good website. They're not going to have a good Facebook page. And especially these guys that are in their 80s. I mean, hell, some of these guys don't even have an email address. And it's like, how is that guy how is a rancher or a breeder in Honduras ever going to find out about a guy here in the United States that has no website or Facebook page? It's impossible.
Just typically making sales off of repeat customers and word of mouth.
Yep. And that's the way it used to be done. And the best product used to win in the marketplace. But today, and I think this is going across not just the cattle industry, but a lot of industries, but it's usually who's the best at marketing.
Who's most represented.
Yep. That's who the breeders are. And I do want to touch on it, though, Patrick, that it's not that we're only going after guys in their 80s, that if you and your wife were talking to guys, it's honestly, we're after the best products. And but we, the whole Bos Sires team, we could really care less about your age, who you are, where you're from.
No, it's actually really encouraging how many young people are in this. I'm finding more and more people in their early 30s care more about a sustainable world for the beef industry than they do personal profit. They want to see the world fed. They want to see proper genetics move forward. And even though they are our age, they don't have the ability to reach the world the way Bos Sires might be able to.
And just to reassure people here in the people here in the States or Australia or whatnot, that I know in some of my trips in Central America, yeah, once again, it's the new generation or our generation is they're waking up. And I've personally talked to some of these guys that are the younger age, and that's like I said, I've had these conversations, but their fathers were wanting them to take over the ranching operation, but the new generation's like, well, Dad, we've never been profitable. Why the hell am I going to do this?
So they're currently looking for new models.
Yeah. But the genetics, and this could be a whole other podcast on how did we get to where we're at today, but stuff is so out of whack that it's easier to see now compared to 40 years ago or 30 years ago. And when I've talked to guys like Hayden Moore and asked him like, hey, when did we start going down the wrong direction? And he answered those back in the 80s and 90s when seed stock breeders started going down the wrong path. But here we are in 2025, and it's a lot easier to see it now.
I think that's an excellent point to transition to speaking about our legacy breeders.
Yes, sir. So I guess the other type of breeders is the legacy breeders, which are the guys that not that we're, or I know we're saying we're not discriminating against age, but here are with legacy breeders. Those are the boys that, or I say boys, there's definitely husband-wife duos out there, and but it's breeders out there that have been doing the right thing their whole life. And I guess, and here we are swooping in where I know we touched on it earlier, where Bos Sires is scientifically proving that these guys are right. For the legacy guys, it's kind of sad that their voices aren't being heard. And it kind of common sense earlier, or we are saying Bos Sires is founded in common sense, but maybe some common sense would be, hey, maybe we should listen to the breeders that have been doing it for 60 years and have been profitable at it. They know what works. And yet we're listening to universities that are full of PhDs that have never owned a cow. Like it's kind of a maybe these older guys, these legacy breeders are right. So anyway, so the legacy breeders is I know this is a cooperative type deal. So some of these legacy breeders maybe join a cooperative isn't that logical because some of them don't even own cows anymore or have a couple. But what we've I guess this Bos Sires team, we've been seeing these legacy breeders, they do care about the future of the cattle industry and do want the younger generation to succeed, and they want to pass wisdom on. But what's just sad is no one's listened to them, or people haven't been listening to them all these years. So anyways, so that's where the legacy breeders are joining. And I mean, they're giving access to their genetics or their wisdom, or a combination of them both.
Well, not to jump ahead, but that'd be part of our learning from the legacy portion, correct?
Oh, 100%. And yeah, Patrick. And I mean, people have been telling us that we need to create a bunch of educational material, and the wisdom of these breeders out there is priceless. But instead of us creating our own educational material, it's obvious to us or common sense that the legacy guys should be creating it. And I know, Patrick, that's where we got different projects in the pipeline. But
I'm doing my best.
Yeah, our to-do list never ends, but I know that's going to be exciting as hell I'm learning the hell out of, or learning a lot from these guys. And
you're learning a lot, and you've been in this world forever. I'm learning a new language, a new way of walking, and a new way of talking.
Oh, no, 100%. But I guess to put stuff into perspective or full picture, or full circle again, but it's like when I was in Florida talking to one of these legacy breeders, and his name's Marcus Shackelford, and he's still using genetics from the 1960s. And when I saw his Brahmins, I was reminded of my own. And that's where I was like, holy shit, that's all I've been doing is trying to recreate what this guy's got.
Yeah.
But that's where I try to, and I'm not trying to take away from my own herd, but I guess my journey that led me to the same kind of cow has been pretty cool. But I also try to explain to guys out there that it's like, imagine where Kallion would be today if I knew about Marcus Shackelford 15 years ago, or hell, like when we were talking about incentive structure, not trying to pick on my dad, but hell, I know he spent a fortune on cattle and genetics and all this stuff. And imagine if you knew about Marcus Shackelford.
Yeah,
Like that would have. We're talking about incentive structure. So instead of my dad spending all that money on mainstream stuff that can't make it, I'm sure Marcus Shackelford would have liked that paycheck 20 years ago.
absolutely. Well, I think that's a good break, Grant. I needed to ask you about the role of our international representatives.
I guess the business model of Bos Sires is it's set up to where it's able to be replicated in other countries or other regions. So part of it, of the international representatives, is for people to kind of create a franchise of Bos Sires in the country and create. So it's like a business model that can help recruit the breeders that need representation, and but then I guess not just as important, but so is to help create the distribution network.
So it would be the feet on the ground.
Yep, 100%. And I guess leading into the distributor part of it is, and sometimes these representatives are, depending on the size of the country, they're able to handle distribution themselves.
Okay.
Or I know earlier I was talking about characteristics of cattlemen is that it's hard for them to get out because they're so hands-on and tied to their cattle. So some of these representatives internationally that are really good cattlemen and are able to identify the right kind of cattle, a lot of times it makes sense for them to hire out the distribution of it. And that's where I guess another way people can get involved is as distributors, which is a point of contact for people to call to buy semen or embryos or whatnot. I know a big part of distributors also is just education and awareness, and for people to wake up and realize there is a better way.
Okay, well, that wake up and awareness ties really well into what I feel our consultant's role is. John notated on my last podcast on what his role was as a consultant to a degree and a rep, but I was hoping you could define what our consultants' roles are, and particularly our regenerative ag consultants.
So on the consulting side, I know there's kind of your generic, or not generic, but consulting on a genetic aspect on, which I guess would be kind of where John and I come into play. I mean, we're here to help 100%. And I guess because some of this might sound pretty daunting or for someone that owns cattle already, and then they hear about this, they go, okay, like this is a kind of a shock, but no, we're definitely here to help. Just as importantly, or more importantly, is the regenerative ag consulting, which me personally, I've I'll admit it wholeheartedly that I was very ignorant when it came to regenerative ag. Just a couple years ago, I didn't write it off, but I didn't look into it much, and I was pretty conventional on my pasture management. But this is something I've been trying to wake up a lot of Americans is and these trips internationally, like when I was in Bolivia and Colombia and Costa Rica, that there's actually the breeders or ranchers down there, a lot of them are freaking badasses at regenerative ag, and that they're very not radical, but they're way ahead of, I would say, way ahead of the American industry. Like my buddies in Bolivia are rotating daily and moving hot wire. And when I first talked to them, they told me this is 2.5, 3 years ago, but they were telling me, Grant, you got to do it. You got to do it. And I was stubborn and didn't listen a whole lot. But when I was in Costa Rica, that's where I got to see it again. But I saw multiple ranches where a friend of mine had been doing these practices for one ranch. He'd been doing it for 5 years, another one for 4 or 3 years, and another one for 1 to 2 years. And when I saw the transition across 3 ranches, that's when I was like, oh shit, I give up. This is real. Like, this is cool as hell. But the consultants that like Jaime Elizondo and Enrique Guerrero that are part of this, and we're very welcome to other people wanting to help or help consult. But I know those 2 guys in particular are very aware of the synergy or how the right genetics complement this regenerative ag practices on the soil and the pasture. Then I know we talked on it earlier about what's at stake, but I know, and I'm not trying to tease or make fun of anyone, but I know when I read my first Alan Savory book, when I was reading it, I know the whole time I was screaming, the cattle, the cattle, the cattle, like the genetics have to be right. And that you can be perfect on management of your soil, but at the end of the day, if it has to be the right kind of cow. And that if the cow's not naturally fertile, it doesn't matter how good the nutrition is I mean, if that chick's not a chick, she ain't going to give you a calf. I know that's kind of where I mentioned his name earlier, but that's kind of where the Johann Zeitsman comes into play. And I know he's been preaching this for years about the combination of both is critical.
Well, I can tell you this: the few consultants that with Bos Sires in relation to the regenerative ag, they're definitely inspirational. I know that, and how it could apply to real world practices. Even on my small operation, we're in the same issue. We don't really see how any of these mainstream thoughts could be applicable to our operation. And just listening to a couple of these guys speak of their minimal efforts and stuff like that, it could be applied to almost any property size. Just developing a little bit of rotational grazing and stuff like that. And I really do feel like any size operation could benefit from both sides of our consultant work, the genetic and the regenerative ag, and them working hand in hand. I do think that's something uniquely beautiful that Bos Sires is doing, and I'm proud to say that we're doing that. Is that it's hand in hand.
Oh, 100%. And I know the term regenerative ag, and I'll admit it that I was ignorant as hell several years ago, but I know regenerative ag kind of has it almost comes across as non-profitable, but I know regenerative agriculture, when it comes to cattle and pasture rotational grazing.
Well, when you're speaking low input, if you can get more out of what you have,
it's sustainable agriculture. Yep,
that's right.
But I know the word sustainable also has almost like a tree hugger term,
it's a buzzword.
Yeah, it's a buzzword, but which I mean, it's sad what's going on, but I know some of these breeders, it's a buzzword that's being thrown around like crazy. And there's breeders out there that are, you can call it greenwashing, but preaching sustainability. But yet behind the scenes, their cows only have a calf once every 1,300 days. And you're like, well, I don't know if that qualifies as sustainable, but.
Well, Grant, we both touched a little bit on our ignorance. So on that note, let's move to the wisdom side and talk about some of the education that we're trying to hope to build with Bos Sires.
Yep. No, and I know we touched on it earlier about what's at stake, but the legacy breeders is a whole generation of guys that have been doing the right thing their whole life. And their wisdom it's a deep pool, but it's also untouched. So yeah, I mean, eventually, I know, the future, that generation won't be around anymore, and their knowledge will go with them.
Yeah, we've got to preserve some of it.
No, 100%. And I know the Bos Sire team, we're going to do what we can to try to capture what we can. And
we're part of the digital age. We're going to digitize as much as we can, baby.
There we go.
Yeah. All right. So that covers our breeders, our legacy breeders, our distributors, our international representatives, our consultants, and we've covered our education portion. So I think all that's left is for us to let everybody know that the Bos Sires family is ever growing, and that we're very inclusive to those that match the motives moving forward in our vision. And would you like to go further with that?
Yeah. I know we'll get better at keeping everyone informed, but this thing is, I know Patrick, you and I talk pretty often, and Kristen, and this thing is growing rapidly. And what was it, 2 weeks ago? I never would have thought we were going to have Bos Sires Pakistan, and here we are. That's a a month ago I never would have thought about Bos Sires freaking Canada, and yet here we are.
Absolutely. That was very exciting.
But a cool analogy was like a younger breeder that I guess he had heard about Bos Sires, and I guess the analogy he gave me was like, yeah, Grant, he's like, I heard about Bos Sires, and he's like, it was like a smoke signal. And he's like, then I got to the website and started seeing this, and he's like, oh shit, the smoke signal has a fire. And he's like, and then when I reached out to y'all answered, and He's like talking to y'all. He's like, "Oh shit, the fire is real." He's like, "Hey, I have a home finally." Like, I guess where he was, and I don't remember if he was in Minnesota or Michigan, but he literally thought he was alone and didn't know that there's other guys like him out there. And like you're saying, his family's growing very, very rapidly, and that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Well, and the nice part about it too is it's a great mix across the world and our country. I've got the pleasure of speaking with quite a few people at this point, and it's a lot of young people and it's a lot of older people. But there's everyone I talk to. I mean, John's interview, you heard his kids in the background, and one of these episodes you're going to hear mine in the background. And I'm trying to help build a better world for him, and I know a lot of people are as well.
Oh yeah, no, my son Tristan's, it's nap time right now, so
that's great.
I guess that's why everyone's not getting to hear him running around.
All right, Grant. Well, we're getting to the end of this thing, so I just wanted to take a moment and thank all the listeners, and thank you for being on today. If y'all haven't heard our last episode with John Atkinson, please check it out. It's a little rough, but it was our first, and it's always getting better, and we plan to get better in the future. If you would like some more information from Grant and his operation, we'll have Kallion Farms linked in the description for this podcast. And as always, our Bos Sires information will be linked as well. If you have any questions, reach out to anyone in the Bos Sires team. You might be able to find a local rep at this time, but I know you can reach out to Grant or others through Facebook, our website, and any other platform we happen to be on. Grant, do you have any closing statements?
No, I appreciate your help, bud. And working with you has been awesome. And I just know, like, the whole concept of Bos Sires is like, it has been awesome that, I don't know, this past 10 to 15 years that people, like, I'm not going to say I guess you can say I've been the black sheep of the Brahma breed. And literally I hear people try to call me crazy or like, "Oh, don't listen to Grant, he's crazy." And just like, no, I just have common sense and I've been trying to do the right thing. And that's where getting to meet these breeders all over the world that have been labeled as crazy as well. And it's just kind of cool where it's like, all right, finally there's a community of guys that still give a shit, and that's us. So,
either that or you're finding more crazy people that are like-minded.
I mean, earlier we talked about it earlier, but I guess that's the big thing with Bos Sires is like, hey, we're the guys that still give a shit, and we give a shit about the future, and we're trying to do the right thing. And so I guess, yeah, here we are.
No, I'm excited to be a part of it. I really am. And thanks for coming on and talking this through with me today. I think it'll really help benefit everyone out there, having a greater understanding of what we are, what our mission is, and the impact we hope to make in this world.
There you go. I appreciate you, bud.
All right, have a good one.
All right.
Thank you for tuning in to Sustainable Stock, Reviving Legacy Genetics. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share. Join us next time as we continue exploring the legacy and future of cattle ranching. For more information, visit us at bossires.com. That's BOSSIRES.com. Or connect with us on Facebook. Until then, stay rooted in common sense and connected to the herd.